Bill Nye just came out with a YouTube video titled, "Creationism is not appropriate for children." I want to spend just a moment of your time looking at exactly what he had to say. He starts out literally the very first line by saying, denial of evolution is unique to the United States. Trying to make us think that we're the only ones left, that we're an island out there, and that everyone else has already bought into the idea of evolution. And yet, I would point out the fact that Bill Nye didn't do his homework. For you see, there was an article that was published in the journal Science in the year 2006. It was titled Public Acceptance of Evolution. And in that particular journal article, they go through and they show all of the different nations and what they actually believe, and it's not the United States that holds the honor of being the only one. In fact, the nation that actually believes in creation the most is a nation called Turkey. If you look at the chart itself, you'll notice the United States is far from being alone in our belief systems. He goes on to tell us that people are moving to the U.S. because of all things science. Listen to what he says. People still move to the United States, and that is largely because of the intellectual capital we have, the general understanding in science. Well, that's interesting. And I would really like to find out where he's getting his data from. Because if you were to just do a generic Google search on why do people move to the United States, science doesn't come up in the list. In fact, when you really find out why are people moving here, the number one answer, money. People feel like they can still do better in the U.S. than in other nations. They're also looking for things like freedom or liberty or the opportunities that America can offer that other nations can't. It's kind of interesting. Bill Nye didn't point out the fact that we started as what most would consider a quote-unquote Christian nation, and people were seeking to come here, not because of our science. In fact, I've never one time heard anybody say, I'm moving to the United States because of their science. He goes on in his YouTube video to say that we're holding people back. He said, when a portion of the population doesn't believe in that, talking about in evolution, it holds everybody back. Well, I would ask Bill Nye, well, what are we holding people back from? Because you see, there are a lot of folks out there, both presently and in the past, who didn't buy into the evolutionary theory and weren't holding people back. Like, for instance, we look in history, men like Sir Isaac Newton. Let me ask you, Bill, do you really think one of the greatest scientists of all times, a man who believed in the Bible, didn't buy into the evolutionary theory, was he holding us back? This is a guy who actually wrote papers refuting atheism and defended creation and the Bible. In fact, Sir Isaac Newton said, I find more sure marks of authenticity in the Bible than in any profane history whatsoever. Or what about Johann Kepler? One of the founders of the field of astronomy. Was he holding us back? A man that went to seminary for 2 years and said that astronomy was thinking God's thoughts after him. Or maybe you think Blaise Pascal was holding us back. A man who studied intensively in hydrostatics, differential calculus. He studied the theory of probability, and yet it was Pascal who came up with that famous wager, who said, how can anyone lose who chooses to be a Christian? Or maybe it was Robert Boyle, Boyle's law. Maybe it was Boyle who was holding us back. This is the father of modern chemistry. And yet upon his death, Robert Boyle actually had money set aside for the Boyle lectures. Not lectures on chemistry, mind you, but lectures for proving the Christian religion. Or maybe you would think it's Michael Faraday, one of the greatest experimental physicists of all time, who held deeply to the Bible. You see, when you look at it, science wasn't being held back by these men. The foundations, the very fields were being laid by these men. Bill goes on to say, your whole world is going to be a mystery instead of an exciting place. If you don't believe in evolution, you're not going to get to that exciting place. It's all going to be fuzzy. Well, that's interesting. Since the last time I checked, evolution theory's got some mysteries it can't explain. So maybe Bill Nye can help us in explaining, how do you get something from nothing? You know, allegedly before the Big Bang there was nothing, and then that nothing exploded, and we got all of this. So maybe he could help us understand, or maybe he could help us understand, how do you get inorganic producing organic material? Or how do you evolve male and female genders, by the way, in the same location at the same time? Or maybe Bill Nye can help us understand where morals come from. If they come from man and not God, maybe he can help us understand which man gets to decide what's right and what's wrong. And last but not least, maybe he can help us understand, how do we get rational from irrational? He goes on then to take the tactic that basically anybody believing in creationism, you're in the minority. You know, you're just this small little isolated group out there. He said, quote, so once in a while I get people that really, or that claim they don't believe in evolution. Once in a while. Well, that's interesting again, because the same study that I quoted earlier from Science 2006, it actually lets us know that about a third of Americans firmly reject evolution. And in fact, only 14% of adults believe that evolution is definitely true. Bill, that leaves 86%. My question would be, if this is only happening to you every once in a while, where are you hiding? He then turns to his evidence. Radiocarbon dating, starlight. You notice, though, he doesn't stay there long. He doesn't talk about the fact that with radiocarbon dating, it's based on assumptions. For instance, in order for radiocarbon dating to be true, basically everything has to be uniform. Or, look at number 2. We have to assume to know what the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 was in the environment in which the specimen lived during its lifetime. How do we know that for sure? We have to assume that the half-life of carbon-14 really is 5,730 years. We also have to assume there hasn't been any contamination. All of these assumptions have to be true in order for this dating method to be true. And yet the reality is, most of Bill Nye's colleagues have already realized there's a problem with this. I want to read to you a quote, and I recognize it's a little bit longer quote. It's written by Dr. Robert Lee. It appeared in the Anthropological Journal of Canada back in 1981. Listen to what he had to say about radiocarbon dating. He said, the troubles of radiocarbon dating method are undeniably deep and serious. Despite 35 years of technological refinement and better understanding, the underlying assumptions have been strongly challenged, and warnings are out that radiocarbon may soon find itself in a crisis situation. Continuing use of the method depends on a fix-it-as-we-go approach, allowing for contamination here, fractionation there, and calibration whenever possible. It should be no surprise, then, that fully half of the dates are rejected. The wonder is, surely, that the remaining half has come to be accepted. No matter how useful it is, though the radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies. The chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually the selected dates. Or maybe we could ask militant atheist Richard Dawkins his view on radiocarbon dating. Dawkins said, it is useful for dating organic material on an archaeological or historical time scale, where we're dealing in hundreds or a few thousands of years, but it is no good for the evolutionary time scale, where we're dealing in millions of years. Or how about that starlight in time? I mean, surely the distant stars prove that everything is millions or billions of years old, right? Again, I would ask that Bill do his homework, Because you see, roughly 12 short years ago, there was a study done by a group in Princeton, New Jersey. It appeared in the Associated Press, showing that the speed of light, something we've always believed to be a constant, it's not constant. Oh, it's constant here within our own atmosphere. But these folks were actually able to get the speed of light to change. Now, think about that for just a moment. Inside of our gravitational field, we know it's a constant, 186,000 miles per second. But out in space, we now know light acts differently, and we think it may even act exponentially differently. Bill goes on to say, don't make your kids do it because we need them. Talking about believing in creation, he tells the adults, you can do that, okay? You know, if you're going to do that, that's fine, but don't make your kids, because we need them. Well, that sounds an awful lot like another statement that was made by somebody named Adolf Hitler, who said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. Why? Because he needed the children. He needed them in order to change the whole nation. Bill Nye goes on to say, we need people that we need engineers that can build stuff and solve problems. Because, I mean, after all, if you believe in creation, you can't do that. We've got to have evolutionists, because it's only them that can solve problems and build stuff. Now, that's very interesting as well. Because last time I checked, evolution theory's only been around for about 100, 150 years. Darwin's book came out in 1859. So maybe Bill Nye could explain all of the things that were built prior to that. How did they come into existence? Folks, this isn't science. This supposed science guy is doing nothing but being a political guy. He's trying to push his worldview on you. And in the end, he as much admits that. He says, you know, in another couple of centuries, that worldview, I'm sure, will be, it just won't exist. He's talking about creationism, a biblical worldview. And he's saying it won't exist. Again, I would say that that's kind of interesting. Because just a few short weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go over to London during the Olympics, was there and had the chance to walk through the British Museum of History. A place where they actually have artifacts, archaeological pieces of evidence that support not the evolutionary theory, but the Bible. Interesting, the British Museum of History is not filled with words like could have or should have or probably or maybe, but rather this is just cold, hard facts. Evidence. Bill Nye? He's not a real science guy. In fact, I would suggest to you, he needs to stick with the baking soda and the vinegar. But as for the real science, the real philosophy, I would suggest you leave that to the professionals.